Hi, my name is Megan Becker, and I'm the Director of Care Team Services, and I am glad to be with you today. We are going to talk about the Parent's Guide to the First Year. And I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Jim Marsh, who's going to introduce himself and talk to you a little bit about what you can expect.
Well, hi, and it is good to be with you, even if it is virtually. I was thinking about this presentation, and it's one that Megan and I have done over the years, and it's really one of our most favorite things that we get to do together, and certainly miss you and look forward to seeing all of our parents in the fall. But I am Jim Marsh, and I am the Dean for Student Health and Wellness and the Executive Director of Counseling Services. And, you know, when we think about parents and, probably who is watching this, this session, really, we think of you in three groups, right? And you're going to probably fall into one of these three. That first group is what we call the rookies, and you're the ones who, this is your first time sending a student off to college, right? And then there's another group that's probably here, and you're our veterans, and you've done this before. Maybe you've sent another student off to college, but you're here trying to see, what's new or maybe what's different about Baylor compared to where maybe your other student went. And then the other group, and this is the group that I need you to humor me here. So if this is you, wherever you are watching this, I want you to stand up and maybe do a little dance or something like that. But you're the empty nesters, right? And you know who you are, and you're the ones who are celebrating, and your life is really about to change. But when we think about college, this transition, it's a major life transition. Your student is learning how to, manage relationships. They're making new friends. They're managing their time, their finances at an entirely new level. And at Baylor, we think about and take very seriously this idea of calling. What are you called to do in life? What's your meaning? What's your purpose? And that's something that we really focus on here. And your students can be thinking about those values that guide them in life. And we just know that your involvement is very important. In fact, research tells us that for students whose parents, whose families stay involved and stay connected during their college years, they have two outcomes. One is they make better grades, and the other is they graduate at higher rates. So your work is not done yet.
So today we're going to talk about some shaping of expectations of what your students can expect, things you want to know, things you need to know about a student's first year, things we think that your students would be helpful to know. We're going to talk about some transitions. Students really need parents who are generally interested in what they're doing in college, celebrate with them the opportunity of going to college, recognizing the changes they're going through, allowing them to make their own decisions, different things like that. And sometimes it's important to remember that there are things that students don't appreciate. Your role as a parent is changing. You're no longer the parent of the high school senior or the star of the football team. You are who you are. And when I went to orientation, when I went to college, I remember we were at an orientation session, and the guy said, okay, if you played football, stand up. If you were a cheerleader, stand up. If you were in theater, stand up. And everybody was like getting so excited. And then he looked into the microphone and he said, nobody cares. And it's that transition, right? Because now your student, and it's the same for you, your student is in college. And so it's a transition for you as a parent to know what your student is going through, and your identity is changing as well. And so we're going to talk about those things today and hopefully give you some helpful information about what you can expect and what your student can expect. So here we are, the journey begins, and here you are on I-35 with 400 of your closest friends, and the construction that you will experience is something that we've been dealing with for just about a year. So we're looking forward to your students having all of their belongings and coming our way.
Yeah, and it's excuse me, it's an exciting time, and we haven't released move-in dates at the time of this recording, but I'm sure they will be released very soon. My guess is your student will be the first one to know what those dates are, and we'll begin a countdown, I'm sure, very, very quickly. We think about the start of the semester, and we want your students to get off to a great start. And really everything we do is designed to help them get off to a great start. And I just want to share a few thoughts that hopefully will be some tips that will help you and your student get off to a great start. One of those is I would encourage your student and you to get to know their CL, which stands for community leader. And this is the person in the residence hall who will really connect with your student, and they're really that person who helps your student knows what's going on the campus community and helps them to stay connected. Thinking of staying connected, on the weekends, it's over those weekends there in the residence halls on campus that where your student makes those connections and builds relationships. And we just encourage our students to stay on campus, certainly the first several weekends, to really make those connections and build those friendships. The next thing seems obvious, it's why you're here, but it's to go to class. They will be reminded of this often. You're expecting this of them, but research also tells us that attendance in the first 5 weeks is a significant predictor of your final grade. It's again in that theme of just getting off to a great start and putting in that work early and often. And then the last thing is really about phone calls or texting or communication. And I realize that you and your student, you may call or text 80 times a day at this point, and then some of you might only get one text or two barely a day. I know there's a great variety, but wherever you are on that that spectrum, when your student's here and you don't get as many texts or calls as you're used to, when you do get that phone call, just receive it, right? Just be glad to hear from them. Don't give them the lecture, and the one I'm talking about is you haven't called enough. You need to know that your student is going to need you at some point. They're just going to need you at some point. And you want them to feel like they can call you without getting a lecture. So I want to shift just a little bit and zoom out and think about the fall semester as a whole. The fall semester just feels long in many ways. I think at some point it feels long for students. I know it feels long for those of us who work here eventually. And part of that is we just don't have a lot of breaks. There's typically historically been a day for fall break, and then there's Thanksgiving, which is, it's late in the semester. So it can be long if when there's not a lot of breaks there. And we'll talk about the spring later because it's a very different experience. But probably somewhere there, maybe in the end of August, early September, your student might have their first quiz. But usually around the middle of September, your student will have their first major exam. Now, my first exam grade in college was a 41. I made a 41 on a political science exam. And I can tell you that I never made anything close to a 41 in high school or any other point in my life. Now, I had to make a 98 and a 96 on my last two exams to have a C. in that class. And I can assure you that's an awful lot of work to come out with a C for a class. Now, hopefully, none of your students will make a 41 or anything close to that. But if they do, you may need to have the conversation with them that my parents had with me. And it was, you wouldn't be there unless you could do the work. And that is true of every single student that is coming into the fall semester here at Baylor University, and every single student represented by the family and parents who are on watching this call, watching this session. Your students wouldn't be here unless they could do the work, because they can do the work. Now, I had to make some adjustments. I had to make some pretty big changes to go from making a 41 to a 98 and a 96. And I just think that is what the fall semester is all about, is about making the adjustment, making the transition, the effort, the time, the work that needs to put in to that fall semester. As we slide into November, I will tell you that it's probably the busiest month. In my opinion, it's probably the hardest month for students of the whole academic year. It is when all of the assignments and the papers are due, and there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of stress that they experience, especially if they have not managed their time well to that point. So know that, be aware of that, be supportive during that time. I will tell you that Baylor has great resources. And what other point in your life are you going to have all of these people employed by the university whose sole job is to help you be successful, to help your student be successful? And I would say take advantage of that and do it earlier rather than later. Certainly I've been working in the counseling center for 21 years now, and there's just more I can do for a student who walks in say September than I can for a student who walks in late November. So take advantage of those services early and often.
So as we think about the fall semester, there are some things that you kind of want to consider in thinking about what your student is actually going through. So Jim kind of talked about the overview of the year, of the semester and the academics, but I'm going to talk about some practical things that might be helpful for your students to know. So as you know, Waco has become a little bit famous for the silos and fixer-upper. And while I'm not here to be Chip and Joanna to tell you about how to remodel your house, I do think it's important to consider the way that you maintain the space for your students. And nothing will erode their confidence like coming home to their room that they've now found is now a new media space or an office or a craft room, much less the siblings' bedroom. So it's important to remember that your students are still a part of the family, right? They're still a part of the decisions that are being made in the household. And if you're going to change their room to one of those things, it might be important to remember that they want to be a part of that process. And another thing to remember as you go through the fall semester and as you send your students off is that some days it's going to be really, really difficult to make decisions because they're beginning to take responsibility for themselves. Remember, they have been in your house for 18 years and you have been helping guide them to independence, but they're still having to figure out when they're going to do their laundry, getting to class on their own, figuring out how to eat in the dining halls, living with new people, all the changes and adjustments. And sometimes just making a decision is going to be difficult. And so they might call you and say, I am completely overwhelmed with all the decisions that I have to make. And you can just listen to them and make sure they know that you're there and showing them that you listen and that you care. And they don't want to hear I told you so, you told you this was going to be hard, none of that stuff. They're not interested in that. They just want you to listen and let them talk to you about how hard their decisions are. Another thing that's really important is this ongoing communication. You know, we live in a day and age where they are really connected. And like Jim said, you might get 6 texts a day or no texts. But really, when they do call or when they do text you, make sure that you listen to them and that you speak with them. And encouraging them to communicate for themselves, you know, reminding them the importance of asking questions. Sometimes I think it's really difficult for freshmen to ask those questions on their own and to recognize that they have that power, and reminding them that it's important to be flexible. And I think in the world that we're living in the midst of all that's going on with the coronavirus and changes and everything has been really different for the last 9 months. And I think the whole world has been launched into this area of flexibility, but I think it's really important to remind your students that now is an important time to be flexible. And a lot of that comes in with communication and the things that they have going on. Another thing that's important is that with the communication is to remember it's important for you to ask them questions. They might say things like OLA, the SLIC, the sub, the CLs, rent, all those things. It's really important to make sure that what they're saying is what you're hearing and that what you're saying is what they're hearing. And so just remember that a whole new language kind of comes in. And when they say in November that they're about to sign a contract for an apartment, you know what? They're about to sign a contract for an apartment, and making sure that you understand what that means for them. And they want you to know also that that they're accepting responsibility for their lives. They want you to know how hard they're working. They don't want you to remind them, of course you're working hard, I'm paying a lot. They don't want to be reminded of how much it costs for you to be there, for them to be there. They don't want you to be reminded that you're home alone. It's really not about you. It's really important that you focus on the big things that your students are going through. And you can talk to your friends or your spouses about those other stresses, but it's not an opportunity for you to remind your student of the sacrifice it is for you, but just to recognize that they really are staying the course and making big decisions. So sometimes when they call you, it's going to be really important that you read in between the lines and understand the hidden messages that your student might be communicating with you. It's inevitable that sometimes during the first semester, you'll receive a call from your student in which you think their world has fallen apart. They might be calling you with a subliminal message asking, like this slide says, just for a little bit of money. But they might also be calling with something bigger. They might call one day and say, I have the world's worst roommate. She never takes care of her stuff. She leaves dirty dishes in this one sink that we have in our room. I can't stand the dining hall. My professors are horrible. I'm failing everything. Like their whole world is falling apart. And you'll think that everything has gone wrong. And so in most cases, I just encourage you to listen to the phone call and then hang up. 20 minutes later, you might get a call back, or you could call them back, and then they're like, oh my gosh, this has been such a great week. I have the greatest roommate. The lasagna in the dining hall was awesome. My professors are great. I know where to study. The library is great. And so it's like all in 1 hour, you've had both of these kind of conversations. And so really what they need the most is for you to be present and for you to listen with the love that you have given them for 18 years. Because what you really want is for them to know that you're available for the lasagna in the dining hall, but also the really hard things. And so if you call back and your student is really experiencing a crisis, and you're trying to figure out what you need to do and you can't sleep at night trying to decide, how do I get to Waco? Can I get to Waco? I need to get to Waco as soon as I can. Please know that Baylor is here for you. Dr. Jim Marsh and I are particularly drawn to caring for students, and we care deeply, and we are both available to you as parents as your student might be struggling. The last thing we want is for you to be in Tennessee or Ohio or Dallas or San Antonio and think, what am I to do? We want you to know that is part of what is so great about Baylor, is that there are people here on campus that care deeply about your student. So if your student calls you with a subliminal message or an outright message that they are really struggling, please don't allow that struggle to continue on your own. Just know that we are here to help support them, and we want to do that.
All right. So as we think about coming to the end of the fall semester, and we come upon Thanksgiving, just know that Thanksgiving is a time that, students, many of them will choose to come home for that break. But please be aware that many students will stay on campus during that time. The residence halls will be open, and they may choose to be here because right after Thanksgiving will be final exams, and then students are going home for the semester break, the Christmas break. And some may choose to be here, but just because of the cost of travel or something like that. But this last part of the semester is, it's often probably one of the most stressful parts of the semester. It is that first time through final exams. And what I have found over the years is that most students end up doing well. If they really stay on top of things and keep up with things, they tend to do well, even though it's stressful. And I think what usually impacts students is that they just don't take care of themselves. They aren't eating well. They aren't sleeping well. And that tends to be what impacts them the most. One piece of advice that I have, may be helpful for you as well, is that students just get enough sleep. We know that college students tend not to get enough sleep, but I will tell you that getting 8 hours of sleep is probably one of the best things that they can do. The first 4 hours that you rest is a sort of a physically restorative sleep, and then there in hour 5, we all get something called REM sleep, and that's where we get all the great cognitive benefits of consolidating memory, and our mind just works on problems, right? And we have all had those experiences where we went to sleep thinking about something, and then we woke up the next morning and we had a solution because our minds are active. They stay busy. And so they do this during REM sleep. And so we get a little bit of REM sleep in hour 5, bigger chunk in hour 6, even bigger in hour 7, and then this big chunk in hour 8. That's why we talk about getting enough sleep. And it has so many impacts on your students and our own mental and physical health as well. It is really one of the most important things. In fact, when I talk to student groups, I will say, if I were only allowed to choose one thing that I could change about your lifestyle, I would pick sleep, and that you would get 8 hours of sleep a night. There are some things just to be thinking about as you come to that fall semester. Historically, usually at the end of the fall semester around December, students are having to think about where they're going to live the next year. I know that seems really early, but just know that those conversations begin and you start thinking about that. So just be aware that some of those decisions and roommates start to pop up there in December.
So then here we are, they've done the finals, and it's been overwhelming. But then, you kind of look at the mid-year break and the mid-year pause, and you can kind of also recognize that sometimes there might be your students might be dealing with disappointment. And so after the fall semester is really a time for you as a family to kind of do an honest assessment of how the semester went, to be able to gain perspective, learn from all the experiences that they have had over the past semester, and then figure out ways that you're going to move forward. What are ways that you're going to move forward, and helping your student understand that this is all a big transition, and helping them own for themselves what the perspective is that they need to gain, what do they need to learn from their experience, and how are they going to move forward.
One way to think about the semester break is to think about it as a halftime in a game. And what do you do at halftime? You take a break, you think about, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what kind of adjustments do we need to make? And you make some of those changes. So one of those changes might involve how much time is spent studying. So I want you, just in your mind, to answer this question, or if you're sitting there, with someone watching this session. So answer this question: how many hours a week do you think the average high school student spends studying? How many hours a week does the average high school student spend studying? So go ahead and say that to somebody who's with you, or just think it in your mind. In the past, when we've done this, the answer has ranged anywhere from 0 to 5. And I will tell you that the average is 5. Average high school student studies about 5 hours a week. Well, hopefully to this point, you've been hearing from other faculty and staff at Baylor, and you might have a better idea of what it's going to take to be successful at Baylor. And that number is a lot closer to 25 than it is 5. That's an adjustment. I can tell you that I made that 41 in political science on about 5 hours, right? If that's what you want to do, that's the pathway to a 41, is 5 hours a week. If you want to make the higher grades, it has to be up closer to the 25. And that's an adjustment, though. It's an adjustment for most students. I think one of the other adjustments is reflected in a statistic that I've seen that I find very interesting. And it says that 70%, all right, 70% of today's college students believe that they're in the top 10% academically. All right, just let that sink in. I don't know where your own math skills are, but 70% believing that they're in the top 10%, somebody's going to be left out. And I think that's part of it. I really do. I think that's part of the adjustment that happens for a lot of students, is that they have, especially this generation, there's been a lot of research done on the last several years of the young adult population, college students. They have very, very high expectations for their performance, very high. And in some cases, it's at an unrealistic and an unhealthy level that creates a phenomenal level of stress. So maybe part of that conversation is just a realistic conversation about what the expectations are and being able to manage that.
So then we are now in the spring semester. So the journey continues. You send them off again to come back to school. And some things that we really want you to know are important to us and that we think are important to your students is just this whole idea of making sure your students, when they come to Baylor, the idea of a global education. That's one of the mission statements, one of the things that's really important to the Baylor mission. And so learning more about the world and the other ways of thinking, and they will have the opportunity through classmates and courses and special cultural programs offered throughout the year to kind of broaden their perspective. Study abroad and missions are another great way to do that. Those things are a little bit on hold while we're dealing with the pandemic, but there's still other opportunities for them to get this global perspective in their education. And then another important thing is just getting a command of a second language. We live in an expanding world. The world is also growing smaller every day. And if they're going to find themselves marketable, they might not only become knowledgeable, but they also want to maybe try and gain the command of a second language, just to help them in their job skills and becoming marketable. Another thing that's really important is work experience. Some students work in order to help pay for their tuition and living expenses. Others have enjoyed working during high school and want to continue to hone those skills. And others seek leadership positions in one of our campus organizations. There are so many opportunities for becoming a leader on campus, whether that's through community leader, or being a leader in your Greek organization and your student organization, or new student programs, orientation leaders. There's so many different opportunities for leadership on campus. And so whatever your student chooses, they need to seek out some form of experience that will allow them to really take an idea and to develop that. They need to be able to develop leadership abilities for prospective employees. There's internship opportunities through the Career and Professional Development Department. There's all sorts of different opportunities here on campus that can kind of help your student become equipped. Baylor is for sure committed to helping your students be equipped once they graduate from Baylor. So I'm going to kind of shift to some resources that I think might be helpful for you. This is one that I like to talk to parents about. This is called The Stressed Years of Their Lives, by Janet Hibbs and Anthony Rostain. And it's just a helpful guide for overwhelmed parents and stressed out kids for navigating the college years. That's kind of how they describe it. And I think we're living in a really different age right now that's going to be, we're all living in history right now. So it's important for you to recognize the normal college student stress, but recognizing that with all that we all have going on, there's even more stress as well.
So I wanted to, in the same way that I talked about the fall semester, I want to say a few things about the spring semester. Just as the fall semester feels long, the spring semester, on the other hand, goes by very, very quickly. And the reason is we have a lot of breaks. We will come back there in January, and shortly after returning, we will celebrate the life of Martin Luther King Jr. They're usually around the second or third Monday in January. We also have spring break during the spring semester, and then we have the Friday and the Monday around Easter, and Dia is in there as well. And what happens is there's so many breaks, and especially as you get into really that late March and the month of April, there's just a lot of 4-day weeks as you come to the end of the semester, and it goes by very quickly, and it can just be very deceptive. I'll be honest. Students often think I have more time than I do, and it's just something to be aware of. But before you know it, the spring semester is over and we're into the summer. There are a few things to keep on your radar as you turn the calendar into January and into the spring semester. We certainly value those internships, work experiences. I encourage you to think about those sooner rather than later and try to set those up, for the summer. Also, some people will choose to take the summer to take some classes and get ahead and keep that 4-year graduation target clearly in sight. And I would encourage you to think about that as well, whether that's at Baylor, and I'm sure Baylor will have a number of options next summer if they have this summer, or if that would be somewhere else. So just as Megan shared a book with you, I just want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite books, and it's a book called iGen, and Dr. Jean Twenge, and she's written a couple of books about today's college students. And, I just would not be doing my part, my role that I've had here for 21 years, working with college students in mental health, and then unless I just highlighted some things. If you were to go to any conference on higher ed in the country, and they were to list, certainly prior to the pandemic, I'm sure the pandemic would be number one, but prior to this, top three concerns facing college students is mental health. And I will say that as we move into the fall semester, we are anticipating that mental health needs are going to increase, and we're being proactive and preparing for that as well. So a little bit about the center. We have historically seen about 2,400 students a year. That's somewhere around 13 to 14% of our student population. Here's some information about us. We're available Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, evening appointments on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And we are available to your students 24/7. And we're probably one of the couple of places, the counseling center and Baylor Police Department, or we're that group that's always there, always available. We've also made a shift over the last few years in how we think about the services that we offer to students. Probably most of you, when you think about counseling, you think about that kind of one-on-one individual therapy, which we do a lot of, but also not everyone wants or needs individual therapy. We think of individual therapy as high intensity, high engagement. Not everyone needs that or wants that. So there's really this continuum of services that we have offered for students that might range from a brief consult to a group or a workshop or something like that might really meet those needs. So I encourage you, if you have any questions about the services in the counseling center, in the health center, to reach out to us over the summer, and we can hopefully help you just to find the resources that you need.
And one thing that, as the health center and the counseling center think about the fall, they are going to shift with what's best practice for our students and our staff to keep them safe. So if telehealth is something that the counseling center needs to continue doing, or the health center, both of those areas are committed to staying safe and keeping your students' safety in mind first. Kind of piggybacking on what Jim was saying about mental health and that becoming increasingly more important in making sure we're meeting the mental health needs of our students, I wanted to highlight a little bit about what we do in Care Team Services. In Care Team Services, there are three of us case managers, and really what we do is to help connect students to resources. And so if you think about students who are dealing with mental health struggles, you might think naturally they go to the counseling center, but a lot of what we do is to connect students to the counseling center, but also to other resources all over campus. I've talked to numerous parents who say, I had no idea something like Care Team Services was available. So if you think about the counseling center, if you as a parent say, oh, okay, my student is really struggling, I think I'm going to call the counseling center. Well, the counseling center will just kick that to us because we do the outreach. So while the counseling center receives students in, Care Team Services works to reach out to your students to make sure they know that there is someone there to help walk them through the process of care and resources when it can be so overwhelming for students. So then we've talked about kind of being at the end of the spring semester. We've talked about some resources, but then here's what happens. They're back. So your students are now here peering into your door, and then they're going to come back. So we've kind of talked about move in the fall semester, November, taking a break, the spring semester, but then they come home. And so really recognizing that what your students want is for you to receive them with open arms and give them an opportunity to sleep for about 2 weeks, feed them a good meal, and then you can kind of talk to them about how things went, and they'll be in a better place to be able to receive that conversation. But just recognizing that they will come back and they want home to be a place where they are received well. Now, some students, like Jim mentioned, might do jobs or internships or work at summer camps and different things like that over the summer, but they will come home for a little bit and return to the nest and peer right there into your window saying, "Let me in." So let's kind of talk about briefly, when we've done this session, we've kind of we've been in person and kind of talking about some next steps and some conversations that are important for you to have while you're in orientation. And so I just want to kind of talk about some things that would be really helpful for you to talk about throughout this summer. What are your academic expectations for your student? Your student might be thinking about Baylor like, oh, I'm going to have a great 6 years. And you're thinking, no, it's not going to be 6, it's going to be 4. What are acceptable grades? Are you okay if your student gets all C's, or do you have a GPA expectation that comes with that? And having honest conversations with your students about their career aspirations and not worrying about what you think they should do or what you think will make the most money or what you think will make them the most successful, but really recognizing their strengths and their calling and what that looks like in relation to their career. Are there organizations that you've learned about through this online orientation process that you think would be really helpful for your student to be a part of? Are there leadership roles that have stood out to you or your student as they've learned more about Baylor and the Baylor experience that would be really important for them to plug into and be a part of? Is study abroad something you want them to consider, maybe their senior year or junior or senior year when things are safe for travel again? Is that an experience you want to have? And then making sure you have a contingency plan for success. We always think we have everything lined up and this is going to go this way and this is going to go this way. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, the world has definitely learned over the last 3 or 4 months that we can have as many plans as we want, but sometimes things don't happen the way that we want, like your senior's graduation, for example. But just, do you have another plan for your student if something goes wrong, and making sure you're having those conversations?
So as we think about this transition that's coming up, right? And, I know every student that's represented at Baylor is, they're on different, somewhere different places when it comes to being independent, being autonomous. There's this word that we talk about in psychology called individuation, right? It's just this process of becoming this independent, autonomous young adult. And I think that's what we want for all of our students. And I recognize this is a big change, especially for those of you who are in that rookie category, and this is your first time sending a student, to college. I recognize this is a big change. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about my own transition. Whenever I left for college, I was the oldest of 2 boys, and just through my high school, my parents, I felt like, had given me a growing sense of autonomy and independence as I had earned that. And I think they were trying to prepare me for what was ahead as a young adult and going to college. And I can remember that once my parents dropped me off at college, it seemed like all of that preparation went right out the window, especially for my mom. And starting with day one, I can remember my mom would call. Of course, we didn't have cell phones. We just had that, that phone, that was there in the room. And when she would call and just want to check on me and make sure things were okay, right? And I thought, I am the oldest, and the first one to leave home, and that seems pretty normal. Well, day one turned into day two, which turned into day three, and turned into week one, week two, week three. And my mom, she would call every day just to check, make sure I was okay. And I can remember my roommates were like, "Hey, Jim's everything okay? Your mom, she has called every day just to make sure that you're all right, make sure you're okay." And you have to understand, this was not like her at all. In fact, very different. Not like her at all. Well, I decided, I think it's about my third week in college, to go on one of those road trips. I had made friends with some guys with another part of the state. I was there in North Carolina, and we decided to go on a road trip back to their hometown for like their homecoming high school, where all of their friends were going to be there. Well, I thought to myself, I'm an adult, I'm independent, I can do this. I don't need to check in with anyone. So noon came on that Friday, and we headed out. Well, what do you think my mom did, right? She did the same thing she'd been doing for 3 weeks, is that she was calling to check, and she, would call and call and call and couldn't reach me. Well, fast forward, and this picture here is an actual picture of the football stadium where I was there in North Carolina. And I can remember it was probably around halftime, and you can see that concession stand area in the top right corner. And I was there up on that concrete pad with my new friends from college, and all their friends were back in town from college. And I was thinking, this is it, right? This is the life. I have finally arrived. Well, about that time, you could hear someone coming, this guy, you could hear him coming through the concession stand area, and he's yelling something. And as he gets closer, you can hear him say, "Jim Marsh, is there a Jim Marsh here? Your mother is on the phone." Well, I can remember, all my new friends, they scatter, and I make my way over to this guy just as fast as I could without drawing any more attention to myself. And I'm like, "Hey, that's good. I'm here. You don't need to yell my name in public anymore." And he said, "Hey, your mom is on the phone." Well, down at the bottom of that screen, and that kind of, the very bottom, just to the left, you see a little building, and that was a bathroom. And it was just a cinder block, bathroom. And, on the outside there, between the door to the men's room and the women's room, was a payphone. And, this poor guy, right? He's just there minding his own business, and probably at this point wishing he had kept it that way. But somehow my mom found the number to that payphone, and she called it, and he answered. And he said, "You need to talk to your mom." So I can remember, and you can probably look at this picture and imagine the distance between that concession stand all the way around the stadium and down what was a little bit of a hill, this walk that I had, knowing full well what I had done, right? And thinking, what in the world am I going to say to my mom? Well, we had a great conversation on that payphone, there on that Friday night, and there in North Carolina, and just a good conversation. She was able to talk about, what it was like for her, and that she was surprised by how she was feeling. I'd said this was not like her at all. I was able to talk about what it was like to be called on a regular basis, and we just had a really good conversation. And we settled into a really nice rhythm of calling every week and talking. And in fact, here's a picture of me with my mom not that long ago. And I talk to her all the time now. There might be stretches where I talk to her every day, or certainly every few days that we talk. And, and I say this because I think this is what we all want. Right? We all want this as parents. I will tell you that I have a student who's heading off to college this fall as well. And we all want this type of lifelong relationship with our student, with our sons and with our daughters. But there is a transition that's coming up, and I encourage you to talk about it and be open about it.
And lastly, we're going to talk about the transition and the time to let go. So, like Jim mentioned, we're not sure what move-in's going to look like, but we do know that your student is going to be coming in the fall, and there's going to be some transition to saying goodbye. And so I want you to kind of picture with me what kind of family you're going to be. Are you going to be the kind of parent who leaves your student in the room and says, they've got the brick and mortar, everything's set, the new trash can, the new bedding, the new everything, and there they are sitting on their bed. And when you go to bed at night, the thing that you picture is the shutting of the door, and you say goodbye, and they're all by themselves sitting on the bed, and you've closed the door and you've said your goodbye. Are you going to be the kind of family that stands out in the parking lot and everybody's saying goodbye and saying their hugs, and you see the student as you drive off onto I-35? The last picture you have in your mind is your student standing there in the rear view mirror, waving just like this, all by themselves? Or are you going to be the family, the parents that say, you know what, this is it. This is your time to go to college, your time to have a good time, and you send them off and you say, go find new friends, go find the new folks in the residence halls, or do what you need to do to go get the connections and live your best college life. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to say goodbye, but I encourage you to kind of think through how you're going to say goodbye, because the last picture we think that you want to have is your student standing in the rearview mirror saying goodbye as you drive off, and they're all by themselves in the parking lot saying goodbye. So recognize that we understand what your students are going through. We also understand that in the midst of the global pandemic, everybody is living a different life. But I can tell you that Baylor is committed to your students and committed to caring for your students. And that's what we want you to know, is that we understand that the first year can be a lot, but we care deeply about your students, and we are so glad that you are there. And we're going to leave our contact information on this last slide, and we're more than welcome. You can shoot us an email, give us a phone call. Both of us are still working remotely, but we can also help. We can make contact with you in whatever way is best, through the phone or email. So we are so glad that you're here at Baylor, that you've chosen to send your students to Baylor, and please know that we want the best for your students in this coming year.